Hello guys, welcome to the next episode of Let's Theorycraft Football Manager. So, in this episode, one of the things I want to talk about is developing youth players. It's something I get asked quite often while I'm in streams and things like that, and people ask me, what I think of this player, etc., etc. So I split up into different sections. I guess the first thing really is, why would you want to develop your own players? Well, obviously the first reason would be cost effectiveness. The price that you're going to pay for a youngster when you pick them up might range from 5 to 8 or 9 million, possibly 10, depending on. And obviously that's going to be much cheaper than it would cost you to actually go out and buy a ready-made player. You'd probably be looking at sort of 50, 60, 70 million. And it's probably going to be very difficult to consistently do that because you just wouldn't get enough money coming in. So that would be the main reason. And obviously the other thing as well is, even if you do get them when they're young and you develop them, and they're not quite what you're looking for, you're more than likely going to be able to sell them for a profit and then be able to use that money and reinvest it in towards other players in that, or other youngsters that are available. So, next question would be, well, what really could you expect? What's the sort of results that you might be looking at? Well, this, for example, is a youngster that I picked up. I got him for $5.5 million from Hanover in 2034-35. We're now in 2039-2040. And as you can see, he's more than doubled his value. And if you look at sort of his current ability, he still has a little ways to go, with his only weaknesses being really a team player and bravery. Although we wouldn't mind his teamwork being a bit higher, but that would be for another video. As you can see, he's got a pretty good scoring record for us, 22 goals in 36 games. He's very quick, agile, great dribbling and finishing, composure. Even at the young age of 20, some of these mental stats are fantastic. Another couple of examples, this guy, which is probably my pride and joy, I got him in 2033, and I paid $12.5 million for him. So he's a little bit more developed than some of the other players I have, but you can see here his stats are just amazing, and he's 27, he's worth 37 million. Just give another example, I picked this guy up when he was around 14, 15, 72 goals and 124 appearances. Once again, his stats are great, even though his star rating, which is what I talked about in one of the other videos, but we're not really too concerned with his star rating. So that's the sort of type of stuff that you could get. Probably my best example I have is this guy. I got him back in 2023-24, and I paid 100k for him. And as you can see, he had a bit of a rough start. He went out on loan a couple of times, and then this is where he really got things together in 2026, and he's been sort of a stalwart ever since, and he's just an amazing player. Even at the age of 34, his technical stats are going down, but his mental stats and his marking and sort of his physical stats aren't as good, but he's still a very good player. So that's the sort of thing that you kind of could expect to get. The cheaper that you can get him in with the highest amount of potential, the better. Now, that's all well and good, but I've seen a lot of people with youth teams which are full of high potential players, but it's really getting from being potential into ability. That's sort of the main trick that you have to do. So how do you do it? Well, you need a few things to start off with. You need to have a very good scouting network. You need to be able to identify the youngsters. I'm not going to go into too much detail about the scouting of the players. If anything, I'll do that in a separate video. The other thing really you got to look at is the way your club is composed. You really have to change the thinking of the way your team is built. Your team pretty much is your youth team, and at the pinnacle of your youth team would be your first team. So that's the sort of idea, rather than these are my youth, this is something separate, these are my reserves, this is my first team. It's all one big team. The only difference being is the youth players only play in the youth and reserve games, and the first team players only really play in the first team. So you really want to get that idea going, and to be able to manage that, the best way of doing it is halfway through the season is have a look at your team, have a look at the match fitness. How match fit are your players? Do you have players that are, you know, lacking in match fitness? Now, I admit this guy is lacking in match fitness, but he's my backup goalie, and I don't have any future plans for him. So, but everyone else you can see is either coming off an injury, or they're fully fit, or they're tired after. No, this just had a match, so that's why they're tired after the last match. But you can see everyone is getting match fitness. My under 21s, this guy is just getting his match fitness back because he came off the injury. That guy's out on loan. And my under 18s, everybody should be match fit, or except this guy, but he just came back from an injury. So as you can see, in general, everyone is getting match fitness. So that's all well and good. Now, how do you set up your training? Well, there's two sort of thoughts behind that. First thing really I do when I get a youngster in that has high potential is I want to work on their personality first and foremost. This guy needs a little bit more work on it, but I want to try and get some sort of professionalism in his personality. And I'll post a link to what each of the personalities mean, because they reference to a hidden stat, whether it's handling pressure, how professional they are, etc., etc. So he's had one bit of training already, and he's picked up some player preferred moves. And you know, he's not bad, but his determination's good. I'd say probably I would keep him on I'd either look at 2 stats that he'd need to be good at his position. So let's say if he was going to be an advanced forward, I'd probably look at, first I look at his physical stats, but his physical stats are pretty decent for his age. And I'd probably start looking at maybe his finishing and his crossing, I'd say. And I'd concentrate on those 2 stats. And then if you find that you get a player who's decent, like say 10s and everything, in all his positions, and I might consider putting him on a roll. You really have to do it on a case-by-case basis. And normally what I would do is I would keep him doing that until they hit about 17. Now once they hit about 17, 18, 19, this is where the next step of what you really need to have set up comes into play, which is your feeder clubs. What your feeder clubs will pretty much let you do is let you have more players on your team than you're able to actually take care of. And what I mean by that is you have these youngsters here which you can't give, well, you could give first team playing time to, but you probably wouldn't want to because they're not quite ready. And depending on how close they are to being serviceable, and by serviceable I mean you wouldn't feel scared to death by putting them in your first team squad either for say maybe from the 60 minute onward, or even as a spot start if they need to. You can send them all, you know, if they're pretty far away, you'd want to have maybe a feeder club 2 divisions below you. If they're close to breaking into the first team squad, but they're not quite there yet and they need a little bit more time, probably aim for a division below you, or maybe a foreign feeder club if you could. That's really what you want to aim for. And the idea being is you're looking for a feeder club that will give them first team football, has a very good manager who has very good man management, has very good working with youngsters, motivating and things like that. So you'll have to do a little bit of searching around. And also the other thing as well is if they are going to get first team football, what sort of games are they going to play? Is there a big team possibly that has Europa League games coming up that he's going to get some matches in? He's going to get probably a lot more benefit from that than sitting in your under 18 squad. So once you got your players in that, I said before about getting the personality sorted, the other thing that you want to do is have really good players already in your team, or players that you can bring in just to be a tutor that has the good personality, good determination, and the reason I say determination is it's the only thing that can be increased or decreased through tutoring. Maybe even things like player preferred moves. Obviously, don't pick a player that has a player preferred move you don't want to have swapped over, like say shoots from distance, for example, if you don't want him shooting from distance, because it's going to be so difficult then to get him to unlearn it, and it's a bit of a risk to see whether he's going to pick it up or not. And the other thing, obviously, what things you need to have as a mentor. Well, there doesn't seem to be an age limit for mentoring the player. A mentor can be the same age or older than the person who's being mentored, but it won't really happen if the mentor is younger. So you can't take, for example, a 26-year-old and mentor a 28-year-old. The mentor must be considered better in the eyes of the footballing world. So maybe the best way of telling that is reputation. That will determine how well known they are to the footballing world. They have to play the same position, so you wouldn't be able to take, for example, a defender and, like, say, for example, this guy, and tutor, say, a left back or a midfielder or a striker or a winger. And you also want to try and get slightly similar personalities, or else it'll just fall out. So once again, you'd have to refer back to the personalities and see what it is. If you have someone, for example, who's ambitious and you want to try and make them professional, you might not be able to go directly from ambitious to professional. You might have to go ambitious, balanced, professional, or ambitious, determined, professional, things like that. Now, the other thing that you'll have to keep an eye out on is with your youngsters that you have, you might find that the players that you get in might not quite be suited for the roles that they're doing. And this is especially important for very young players. So maybe the prime example that I can think of off the top of my head is, say if you pick up a defender, or you have a defender that comes through your youth intake, and you look at him and you think, wow, he's a really good defender, and he's like 5'10" or 5'9", and you think, I don't know, that's really risky playing a really short defender, because, you know, any headers they go for, more than likely the defenders are used in set pieces for defending corners. It's just going to be a huge liability. Well, he might be a really good, say, DM or defensive-minded midfielder. At this point, when he's very young, it's one of those things where you can go through and maybe change his position if you need to. You also need to sort of identify what his weakest points are. So I'll give you an example. Say with this guy. Now, one thing you can do is let's say if we are going to keep him as advanced forward, I probably wouldn't. I'd probably try and change him into a poacher myself. Just because as an advanced forward, he doesn't quite have the flair to be a very creative person. Whereas if you do a poacher, his main target is just put the ball in the back of the net. And that's relatively easier to fix just by training his finishing and his first touch. And then as he gets older, his anticipation and composure will increase. So it's little things like that to be able to identify. And using this here is a really good way of determining, A, what stats he needs, which then gives you an idea of what he needs to work on. I always found it was relatively easy to get distracted by big numbers, like, oh wow, he's got all these 20s, and then when you actually look at the stats, they're not actually in important positions. For example, like, oh, he's got good determination, teamwork, work rate. Now don't get me wrong, teamwork and work rate's good, but obviously his finishing and his first touch needs work, his anticipation and composure. And probably, like I said before, in this situation I'd probably train his finishing and his first touch. So, now the other thing that you got to remember with the developing of your players is there's a little equation that you can use. And it's pretty simple. His personality times his match experience times his level of football. So if he has a very good professional, determined attitude, he's getting a lot of match experience at a higher level of football, then he will improve. If any of those isn't correct, he will improve slightly, but not as much as he could. And you'll find that it's to the detriment of the player later on. So, and the reason this is important, players will benefit most from the time in your youth team and reserves when the personalities are developed as much as possible. Players will benefit from their time on loan when the personalities are developed as much as possible. These are very important factors. I can't stress this enough. You know, little minor things like their personality has such a huge effect on how they'll develop. You know, and as I mentioned in my determination one, you also want to try and get the determination at least 16, 17 plus, because it will turn them from a could be great player into a great player. I hope this has been helpful. I'm actually going to stop the video here. I'm actually going to be doing another video, which is going to talk about a couple little tricks that I do just for advanced stuff to help me keep track of what's actually going on, because it can be pretty difficult. Like if you're going to check every 6 months to see how a player was doing and see if his individual training focus is working or not, it's a lot to take into account. So I hope you guys have found this useful. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, share, and let me know what you think of this. See if there's anything I missed out, see if there's any questions you have, and hopefully this will help you get better youngsters reach their potential. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you later.